I'm Angela Kennecke, and this is Grieving Out Loud. Today, I'm honored to sit down for a one-on-one conversation with a man who has spent decades on the front lines of America's fight against illicit drugs, overdose deaths, and fentanyl poisonings. Derek Maltz recently served as the acting administrator of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA. Over the course of nearly 30 years, he built a distinguished career as a special agent with the DEA. He also has led the New York Drug Enforcement Task Force, the nation's oldest and largest drug task force.
I watched the first part of this bombing campaign with synthetic cannabinoids and cathinones, K2 spice bath salts, that were coming into America from these Chinese labs. And no one, including myself, knew what the hell it was until we started seeing emergency room admissions, poison control centers. Nobody really knew what these synthetic drugs were. But we had DEA investigations where we went to the labs in China and we developed evidence. We indicted several targets in China. But anyway, they then shifted fentanyl around 2012 and 13.
Maltz's energy, his knowledge, and his no-nonsense attitude brings a strong and unique voice to the fight against this deadly epidemic.
This problem is developed into a very political issue, which is disgusting.
Instead, Maltz says it's going to take a multi-pronged approach, not just to tackle the fentanyl crisis, but to help prevent the next drug epidemic before it starts. Then you've got this really powerful meth that's out there that's also coming from Mexico, so it's not just fentanyl.
And by the way, cocaine is on the rise again, too, because there's so much pressure on the cartels from the fentanyl poisonings. They're shifting back to their legacy products like meth and cocaine, and they're, increasing revenue that way now.
Well, Derek, welcome to the podcast. It is just a pleasure to have you on. I was able to hear you speak in Washington, D.C. last February and ask you a question, and I was really struck by how passionate you are on this subject. I was grateful for that, actually, as a parent.
Well, thank you, Angela. I'm very sorry for your loss, and I really appreciate the amazing work that you're doing to spread awareness and save lives. I know I work with, thousands of families that are all in the same boat where they're selflessly promoting this topic out there to the public because they're trying to save other lives. Unfortunately, can't bring back your loved one, but I really appreciate what you're doing. So that's why I'm grateful to be asked to be participating today.
I hate it that there are so many of us out there. And we do all say when we get together the same thing, that we are doing this because we don't want another family to experience this kind of heartbreak. Now, you personally haven't felt that heartbreak, but yet you are so engaged. I see all the photos behind you. I know you're with the DEA for nearly 30 years. When is it that you really started getting involved with families and wanting to tell the stories of our children? Because not every administrator, not every person working in the field really is engaged with families the way that you've been.
Right. So let me just give you a quick background. My father was 30 years in the DEA, committed his life to public service. My brother was in the United States military, was fighting for our country. In 2003, he died, came back in a body bag from Afghanistan, and he left his kids behind. So when I became the head of the DEA Special Operations Division in 2005, I watched the evolution of this crisis for many years. I worked with international partners, and I saw the poisoning of our citizens. And I saw the lack of engagement by our government agencies for a lot of reasons, right? Priorities and other things. And then actually, when I was retired from the DEA in 2014, I really had like a calling from God. I know it sounds kind of corny, but I felt like I had to give back because I watched so many families suffering. So I started engaging with families about 8 years ago. I started a project on making collages for the lost voices of fentanyl. And I did that because a picture paints 1,000 words. And I knew that if the congressmen and women and the media started taking a look at these beautiful children that were being deceived to death in many cases, that maybe we can get some attention to the families. So we built up a lot of traction. We did the first rally at the Chinese embassy in 2021 with the Lost Voices of Fentanyl. because April Babcock, the founder of that organization, lost her son. And, she understood China's role and she wanted to get some awareness out there. So after that, we started a movement. There were many, many other families involved, starting their own nonprofits. And to be really blunt, just to be really blunt, I was getting upset because almost 90% or more of the families all said the same thing, that they'd never heard of fentanyl before. And they were very surprised that the government wasn't telling the story. So we started trying to influence government agencies, others, to try to start telling the story. And we built up a movement working with government agencies and working with the families. So I feel like it's an obligation to give back, to help.
We've had April Babcock, the founder of Lost Voices of Fentanyl, on Grieving Out Loud. She's now organizing the 5th annual Lost Voices of Fentanyl rally and march on Washington, set for October 18th of 2025.
Why do we rally in front of the White House? Because it's in front of the White House and we will get attention. And that's what we want. It's like we almost have to shame our government into doing the right thing. And that's putting Americans first, which they're not doing.
You can check out the full episode with April by going to the show notes in this podcast. While you're there, we'd appreciate it if you'd take a moment to rate and review this episode and share it with your friends and family. Together, we can raise awareness and save lives. I'm also grateful that the DEA has the pictures of our children on the Faces of Fentanyl wall in the DEA headquarters. I think that is a huge thing to bring this home to people. And I've always said, my daughter's picture does speak a million words, because people think something like this can't happen to someone like her. And when I say someone like her, I mean somebody who was, she went to private school, religious private school. She had all the privileges, and a lot of these kids do. But it doesn't really matter when these substances are out there. And years ago, you could have somebody, in my daughter's case, definitely she had a problem with substances. And we were really trying to do everything we could to get her help. We were 3 days away from holding an intervention when she died. But these kids can just be experimenting. They don't necessarily have to have an issue with substances. But when I was growing up, even if someone was struggling with substance use disorder, it wasn't a death sentence,
That's right.
And so it's just changed so much. And I feel like the attention is not on it because of all the stigma surrounding illicit drug use. I always say, if people were putting fentanyl into alcohol in bars and people were dropping over dead, what would this country be doing?
Right. So a couple of things on this topic here. So let me back up. First of all, I'm very proud that the DEA, my friends in the DEA, they took the collages of the Lost Voices of Fentanyl and they built that beautiful exhibit. It was their idea. They wanted to expand the awareness campaign with their One Pill Can Kill. Tremendous work. So they get a lot of accolades. But, I was just there recently in front of that wall and I had tears in my eyes because so many beautiful kids, as young as 3 months old. I think there was one guy 70 years old on the wall. But anyway, when you look at this problem and how it's evolved, unfortunately, when COVID hit, right, it started getting worse because there's a lot of depression, there's a lot of anxiety, and any kid in America was vulnerable as they was home on the internet. Of course, social media and some of these sites that these kids are on, there's a lot of peer pressure. So, unfortunately, the problem got worse, accelerated. And then, of course, the criminal networks took total advantage of the weak and the vulnerable based on many, many years of opioid abuse and other drugs that were being misused. So it was this unbelievable evolution, this crisis that we've never seen. I mean, like, we've said it publicly many, many times, but in the history of our country, we've never had a crisis with the poisoning of our future generation like this one. So this requires all citizens to be involved. This is not a red or blue issue. It's a red, white, and blue issue. All Americans must unite, and all Americans should care because it's impacting the rich, the poor, blacks, whites, Asians, Eskimos, Indians, right? So bottom line is something that we've never seen. It's chemicals that are coming into this country, and kids are being deceived to death. And unfortunately, our country is not where they need to be as far as the education campaign, because we will not solve this problem by arresting our way out of it. We have to have really aggressive education. Thank God for Narcan, okay? Because Narcan has saved so many lives. We don't even have a calculation yet. That one of the things that I've been pushing for that really upsets me is I'd love to see statistics across the country of the approximate amount of Narcan. How many times did Narcan get given to a patient where it saved their lives? Because we have no idea. How are we supposed to really justify resources and understand the magnitude of this threat if we only know how many people died? And by the way, those statistics aren't even accurate. We know that. We've had a hard time of getting timely and accurate statistics, but I'd like an accounting of how many people in America by our firemen, our EMS, our police, hospital workers, where they use Narcan to save lives, because that would give us a little bit better idea of the magnitude of the threat. But unfortunately, this problem is developed into a very political issue, which is disgusting,
Right.
because of the southern border and because of China, and people are avoiding the discussion.
Have you lost a loved one to overdose or fentanyl poisoning? I'd like to invite you to share their story on our new Emily's Hope Memorial website called More Than Just a Number. They were our children, siblings, cousins, husbands, wives, aunts, uncles, and friends. So much more than just a number. You can submit a memorial today on morethanjustanumber.org. Let's talk about how complicated this issue is, because it's not just a border issue. It's not just an issue, although the cartels are certainly a major player in all of this. It was my understanding, and I was so fascinated by this when I was at the DEA Family Summit last year, November, and they told us that a lot of times the Chinese were having trouble getting the precursors for fentanyl into Mexico. So they were being sent to organized crime here in the United States, which then in turn sent the precursors to the cartels in Mexico, which made the powder, which in turn sent it back to the organized crime here to press into pills. And I was blown away by that, by the fact that it is not just the Chinese and the Mexican cartels. You've got organized crime within the United States, and quite frankly, many Americans distributing this drug as well.
Right. So it goes beyond organized crime. Everything you said is accurate. There's different evolution trends here with the Chinese and the chemicals and the synthetic drugs. Remember, when I was at the Special Operations Division, I watched the first part of this bombing campaign with synthetic cannabinoids and cathinones, K2 spice bath salts, that were coming into America from these Chinese labs. And no one, including myself, knew what the hell it was until we started seeing emergency room admissions, poison control centers. Nobody really knew what these synthetic drugs were. But we had DEA investigations where we went to the labs in China and we developed evidence. We indicted several targets in China. But anyway, they then shifted to fentanyl around 2012 and 13, taking advantage of the addicted population on opioids. Of course, the corporate cartels were distributing multi-billions of pills into America for years without being held accountable. And a lot of our population got addicted. But then around 2013, we started seeing a lot of deaths in America, specifically like in the Northeast and the Southeast. And we realized for the first time that China was working with the Mexican cartels and the Dominican and other kind of distribution networks in America. And there were, you say fentanyl, I mean illicit fentanyl that was made primarily initially in labs in China. And then they were mixing it in different types of drugs and then ultimately making pills in Mexico. But the thing is, to answer your question or to address your concern, right now, local drug dealers are buying pill presses online that are going to the Chinese websites, ordering up chemicals, ordering up, different types of substances. And then they're maybe getting with a local drug dealer, buying some powder, some cocaine, and then what they're doing is they're making their own fentanyl pills. They're making their own synthetic opioid pills. And unfortunately, Angela, as the American public is trying to catch up and fully understand this fentanyl crisis, the criminals are now pushing out more, dangerous opioids like For example, nitazene, isonitazene, metanitazene, eternitazene, protonitazene. They're also, as you know, mixing these substances with xylazine, the horse tranquilizer,
Right.
which actually causes necrosis, the rotting of human body tissue. So people are literally rotten to death. Now, and let me just say this. With xylazine, the DEA has done studies that over 30% last year of all the fentanyl powdered samples that they analyzed contain xylazine. That stuff's coming from the Chinese labs, and it's very, very cheap. So yes, people are bringing these very, very dangerous chemicals into their houses in residential communities throughout our country. In many cases, not even dealing with the Mexican cartels. Then they're making their own products because they want to, basically maximize profits, make some revenue. They don't want to go to work. So there's a whole new generation of younger Americans that don't want to go to work. They want to make money the easy way. Unfortunately, they're killing our citizens. So it's a very, very complex issue. It's not just China. It's not just the cartels. And that's why we have to do really aggressive, robust education programs in the schools. Every school in America should have a mandate for education based on the synthetic drug poisonings. And also, what I've been preaching, and I can't really get a lot of traction, unfortunately, and we can talk about that if you want, but I've been pushing to get social media influencers, role models, professional athletes, celebrities to get on their damn social media sites and start pushing out 35-second, 45-second reels to educate the kids. And I'm not talking about the old timers that have 25,000, 50,000 followers. I'm talking about the Taylor Swifts of the world that have 300 million followers. I tried to get Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes and, because I'll tell you what happened. It was February of, I believe, 2 years ago. There were 3 Kansas City Chiefs fans that were frozen to death in their backyard in the middle of the NFL playoffs. And I knew as soon as I saw the story that it had to be a fentanyl poison. They were probably snorting cocaine. Well, the autopsy report came back. Turned out it was a mixture of drugs, fentanyl included, and they died, froze to death in the backyard. I felt that this was a good opportunity to try to recruit Taylor Swift to get her educated on this topic and then push out some messages because so many kids follow her. Now, I wasn't being political about it, but she has 300 million followers. How many people have 300 million followers? We have to train and educate the kids where they are. See, people think the kids are watching mainstream media and cable news. Kids are not listening to me testify in Congress, but they're watching video reels all day long on social media. So it's common sense. So I've asked for the president, I've asked for the past president to have a White House summit to bring these celebrities in, get them educated, because I guarantee you, if the Taylor Swifts of the world truly understood what was going on, they would want to step up and save lives. But right now, they don't even understand it. They don't want to get involved in this same old drug issue because in their minds, they think their brain's going to be tainted. I would say the opposite. If any celebrity out there steps up, it's a great thing to save lives. So your brain is going to be enhanced. It's going to be way more powerful if you step up. Like Jelly Roll. Even if Jelly Roll may not have the 300 million followers, he testified in Congress, and it was probably the most impactful testimony that I've seen because he wasn't afraid to say, look, I made mistakes. My friends are dying at record levels. I've been to more funerals than anybody, but I want the word out there. So again, we need the celebrities and the social media influencers to complement the school education programs. Then maybe kids will say no to these poisonous substances.
You're right. I love that idea. And I think you're absolutely right that we have to meet kids where they are, and they're on social media, following people on YouTube videos, gamers and all of those type of people that have millions of followers should be getting a sort of a public service announcement across, right?
Let me tell you a funny story because it's really interesting. So I went out to the Dr. Phil show a couple of times, and Dr. Phil was very, very genuine, very authentic, and he really was surprised when I gave him the information about fentanyl poison. And the Matt brought my collages out there, and he was blown away, and he actually felt responsible for not warning his listeners and his viewers. So anyway, after show, he made special time to do a video reel with me, which I thought was really cool. So we did like a 45-second video reel, me and Dr. Phil. Unfortunately, as much as I love it and I show my friends and I laugh about it, the kids are not following Dr. Phil.
Right. Right.
That's the sad part.
Yeah.
And, I give him an A plus plus for his effort, but I want to make sure we could do the same thing with influences of the youth of America today. And that's the key, in my opinion. And I've been saying this, by the way, this is not me saying this the first time. I've been saying this repeatedly for several years, but unfortunately, people run away from it.
Yeah. Well, I say keep saying it. And I also love how you highlighted how complex this is, that there's not necessarily just one bad guy like Mexico or China that we can point the finger at, although they're certainly all involved. I do believe prevention is key. And personally, and because we've developed a curriculum at Emily's Hope starting in kindergarten, I think we have to start talking to kids as young as possible.
Absolutely. Not high school, it's late.
Right. Way too late because, who has the influence on kids when they're young? Their parents and their teachers. And then as they get older, it's their social groups and their social media, right? Their peers and social media. You're talking about the social media influence, but we have to get to them even before they know what social media is. And
Right.
what concerns me is that over the last decade, the amount of money that the federal government puts into prevention has decreased every year. And now we're looking at huge proposals to basically cut almost all prevention efforts, at least the ones we're working on locally. And that really worries me because I just feel like the only solution to this is to end the demand. It's through education and however that comes for younger and older kids.
Right. So a couple of comments. Number one, my stomach gets sick when I think about the work of all these nonprofit organizations like yours that are out there educating, doing podcasts, making collages, making educational material, going into schools, fighting with the school boards and superintendents to try to get into these schools because of politics. But it kills me that all the families are doing the heavy work and the government agencies, the government institutions, I should say, are not doing their share. So, like, I give credit, for example, the DEA, because it's a law enforcement agency, but they still recognize the importance to get with the families, to learn more about everything, to go out and do their one pill kill, provide resources. That's a good thing for the DEA to do. But DEA is a law enforcement agency that historically that wasn't part of the mission. Yeah, we always had a demand reduction, but they took away all the resources over the years. So a lot of the people in DEA are doing this on their own time. They go after work, they go to schools. But that being said, that's why I've been really vocal in my congressional testimony, in my media programs that I've done around the country, to be able to get out just a very simple point that how are we supposed to stop this crisis if the kids don't even know about it? And as much as the families want to tell the kids, many families are doing that now, but they were never provided any guidance from the government. And right now, I believe with the current administration, they do want to save lives, but we can't focus everything on the border and the cartels because that's only one part of it. Now, granted, it's a huge part. The cartels are the enemy of our children. The cartels are a terrorist organization that has killed more Americans than any terrorist groups in the history of the country. So yes, they have to be dealt with. So we don't want to minimize the accountability for the cartel. We must expand it. And what bothers me is, Emily's Hope and these other organizations have curriculum. They're already doing it. So if I was king for the day, I would find the organizations that already are doing it, bring them in for a summit, develop best practices, and let them work together to get out there in the schools, provide some funding to help them get it done. Because we don't have no time to have the government recreate what the families that know these issues that they've already done. So to me, to be honest, it's common sense. And I will be working, by the way, very closely with the new drug czar when she gets in. She's a friend of mine, Sarah Carter. She cares about saving lives. We work together and we've done presentations around the country to warn the public about all of these transnational crime threats. She's got a lot of passion for this topic. We're going to, unify the efforts the best way we can. And I've talked to her about this in great detail. So she's got the voice, of the administration once she gets confirmed. She's not confirmed yet. But that's another. I just want to make a statement, a general statement. She's going to be the drug czar in the middle of the worst drug crisis in the history of America. And she doesn't even have a confirmation hearing, but President Trump nominated her a while ago. So we have a sense of urgency from Congress, right? That should be getting a priority. Get your drug czar in there. Get your DEA administrator in there. Get your law enforcement executives in there. Let them execute plans to save lives. I mean, it doesn't seem too hard to me, but it's the bureaucracy, it's the politics that get in the way.
Yeah, always, right? And that's true for almost every administration. I think it's bureaucracy and politics. And this should be, like you said, just an issue of a public health issue, really, is what it is.
And an extra,
Yes.
threat as well. So it's a combination. So that's why, in my view, this particular president, when he came in from day one, he addressed it as certainly a national security priority. And now as a national health priority, we have to get the resources applied. We have to get the education. We got to deal with the demand.
Right. So we'll see what happens with the president's budget. And president's budgets aren't always passed, and they aren't certainly always passed as they're initially presented. So I do hope that we don't lose all of that prevention funding that they're talking about right now. I do think you are so passionate about this subject, and you were acting director of the DEA for how many months was that you came back? And
I came back on January 20th on day one, and I stepped down on May 2nd because the nominated DEA administrator was supposed to be in place the first week voted. So my timing was bad. I would have stayed till the end, but I went on based on what I was told.
The new DEA administrator was just recently sworn in on July 23rd. The Trump administration appointed Terrence Terry Cole. He spent more than 30 years in law enforcement, including 22 at the DEA. Since 2023, Cole has served as Virginia's Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security.
And again, I wasn't hired to be the DEA administrator. I was hired to work at the Department of Justice as an associate deputy attorney general. So anyway, it was a great experience. I had an awesome time, but I wish there was the greatest sense of urgency on the demand of going after the kids to teach them and make sure they're educated. But actually what's frustrating me, Angela, is that I talked to many families like yours that already have the curriculum. They're already doing it. So the work's already been done. Now you just have to, organize and take the best programs, the best practices, and just execute it. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And actually, I was engaging with folks inside the administration to get them to understand the demand issues have to be addressed. Otherwise, we're going to be spinning wheels for a while.
Yeah, and sadly, there are kids, and we know this because our curriculum is in 5 states before thousands of students, and by parents like me, but also we brought in doctors and educators and addiction counselors, so panels of
Yes.
experts. It's not like we just threw something together what we thought would work, and then we've been testing it and getting evidence and doing studies on it as well. We've been working on this actually since 2019. So a very long time. It's a very long process. But the kids, as we talk to them in schools, they're seeing these drugs in their homes, often with their parents as well. So we have to end the generational cycle of addiction as well.
Let me just tell you this, because it breaks my heart, but there's a reason I put this little boy in the background, and I try to show it off all the time because it's real simple, right? This little boy was going to daycare, 1-year-old in New York. It was a famous story that drew a lot of national attention, but let me tell you what happened in that, and it addresses one of your concerns. So this Nicholas, Dominican boy, this beautiful boy, wasn't a drug addict, had a bright future, and his mom dropped him off like many working families today have to, make, double income to pay their bills. And then during the day, not only did Nicholas go down, but 3 other kids went down with fentanyl exposure. Instead of the daycare worker calling 911 to get these kids immediate assistance, the first call she made was to her husband, to come back to the daycare to remove all the other drugs that were in the place. So we saw the guy removing the drugs out of the daycare center on the Ring camera. And then we captured him a few weeks later in Sinaloa, Mexico. Of course, she was arrested. They both got 45 years in jail. But what I learned after that incident is the amount of infants, 3 months to 3 years. I started seeing all of these kids around America that were dying. And then you look at the statistics, there's a lot of them that have inadvertent exposure to fentanyl in their parents' house. And then I started making collages of infants, okay? And what happened was, it was heartbreaking. So my first collage that started with Nicholas, and it had several other kids, about 20 other infants. Some grandma calls me and says, Mr. Maltz, can you please add beautiful Charlotte to the collages? Unfortunately, her parents are in jail. I can't advocate because it's a pending court case. But apparently, these parents brought fentanyl in the bag, and little baby Charlotte, who was like 18 months old, touched the fentanyl and died. So the younger generation is being exposed to this, right? So it's not just the drug addicts. So all these people talking about, oh, that kid shouldn't have taken drugs, the family who didn't take care of the kid, and the stigma, they don't know what they're talking about. And then all the military now, you look at some of the statistics, how we're losing more military men and women from fentanyl poisoning. So our future, war fighters, right? They're dying, right? So we have this unbelievable problem, and it's hard to imagine that every American wouldn't get behind this, but they're not taking the time to understand it.
As one of the nation's strongest financial organizations, First Premier Bank and Premier Bank Card have the strength to do good. We support nearly 700 organizations and nonprofits. Our employees give more than 30,000 volunteer hours annually. And we are continually seeking ways to make South Dakota an even better place to live. It's the Premier way. First Premier Bank and Premier Bank Card.
I spent a lot of time with the visuals because, like, the first time I went into Congress, I actually was throwing these things up in the air because the congressmen and women didn't even know. I just sent a PDF document to all of them and say, look, I didn't lose the kid, but this is our country. This is an American issue. It's Republican and Democratic issue. But unfortunately, as soon as you talk about the border, people want to say, oh, they're trying to make this a political issue. But for everybody that's watching this, when you create a situation where the cartels can operate with impunity, it accelerates the death of destruction. So when there was no scrutiny at the border, when they sent the operatives into America at record levels, their ability to move the poison just grew, to a tremendous level. Opening the border definitely contributed, but that's not the only issue. So just to be clear, like you obviously know, because you brought it up, this stuff is coming in from all different ways. And, we have to all just unite behind it. We can't stop fighting over the politics.
Right. And I do think when I saw all the babies and children on the wall at the DEA, I shared that with people, and it got a lot of response. I think when people see young children, I even had a grandmother on this podcast whose grandbaby died because of the mother's drug use. Something was wrong with her brain.
I'm not going to start flashing all these kids, but this is one of them, right? I don't want the baby's privacy and the family's privacy, but it's overwhelming. And I could go on all day with this stuff, right?
Right.
And then with the case I was telling you, look at this, how treacherous these bad guys are. You can see here on the ring, it's a guy removing the fentanyl. This is the wife who ran the daycare center, taking the stuff out before calling 911. Think about that. If you were sitting in a park and a baby was down on the ground, wouldn't you call 911 immediately to save that little baby, that innocent little baby?
Right.
So they only care about money, maximize profits. They don't care about the health and well-being of our citizens. That's a fact.
Right. And the dealers just care about greed. I think I really noticed that. I sat through 2 weeks of trial for some, I call them kingpins of the Midwest here, that were bringing crack cocaine and heroin laced with fentanyl into my community from Chicago. And those guys never used their own product. They killed at least 10 people in my community, including my daughter. And I just saw through that trial the photos on their phones of big wads
Right.
of cash, talking about how they never use their own product. And it was all about greed and all about money and not about caring about people or humanity. And here we have all these young people. My daughter was a talented artist. I've talked to so many parents, their kids were musicians and writers and could have been entrepreneurs. And I always say it's like the lost potential to the world. Like we will never really fully comprehend what we've lost by how many young people have died.
Remember this statement. And I study this, I follow this closely. We have adversaries like the CCP. They sit back in this asymmetric warfare against our country. They like destroying our future generation. It weakens our country. It destabilizes our country. So if you can use chemicals and you can use drugs, poisonous drugs, to kind of destabilize your greatest adversary, that's a good strategic plan for our enemies. And unfortunately, that's happening and it's going to continue to happen. And so that's the thing. We're not talking enough about this. And by the way, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but do you know you're going to start seeing some more and more talk on the news about how the Chinese criminals are buying up all the farmland and the property, where they're picking up
Yeah.
multi millions of dollars of cartel cash. So not only are they providing the chemicals and these dangerous, deadly substances, they're providing the primary money laundering services for the Mexican cartels to kill our citizens. So it's a very, very strategic, calculated plan, but we don't have like anybody pulling together all these different pieces of it with a strategy and then holding government people accountable for the results. Now, fortunately, we are seeing a pretty significant decline in fentanyl seizures at the border, and we're seeing a very significant decline in deaths by fentanyl, right? But there's so much more work to do.
Right. With 80,000 people, when my daughter died, it was 72,000 a year. And now, obviously, we had that big peak, and now it's down to about 80 last year. That's still way too many people dying. And then you've got this really powerful meth that's out there that's also coming from Mexico. So it's not just fentanyl.
And by the way, cocaine is on the rise again, too, because there's so much
Yeah.
pressure on the cartels from the fentanyl poisonings. They're shifting back to their legacy products like meth and cocaine, and they're, increasing revenue that way now. And they're sending it all over the world, too, not just to America.
Right, right. And you're still, you're so passionate about this issue. I can't see you ever stopping talking about it. I know you're done as acting director of the DEA. So what do you plan to do next?
So I have plans to go back to a full-time position, but that I worked for in the past, they allowed me to continue pushing out the message because the company recognized that what I was doing was good, like you said, for humanity, right? And that company that I work for, they actually support law enforcement around the world with different software tools. So hopefully the next company I go to will continue to allow me to get out there and spread awareness to save lives. And, it sounds corny again, but Jackie Robinson had a saying, life isn't important except in the impact it has on other lives. So when I could see families, motivated to go out there and continue the battle and continue the fight, like you say, this grieving out loud, right? So the grieving out loud and unifying people to get the messaging, that's critical. So I support that in that movement. So I'm going to continue in any way I can to participate and help the families because they need big time help. And unfortunately, a lot of politicians jump in the mix because they want the political, advantage over their competitors. But you got to have people out there that are going to step into the fight because they genuinely want to help save Americans. They want to make it, an issue that everyone can unite behind. So that's what I'll continue to do. I really, like I said, I get inspired by it. Ever since I lost my brother in Afghanistan, it's not like losing a kid, but he was fighting for the country. I've been fighting for the country. My father's been fighting for the country. So we'll continue to do what we feel is right, and we're going to give back because we had great careers. I had a great career. I had a great experience working in the DEA and my private, company time. And so I'll continue to go out to law enforcement conferences, speak about the issues. I'll continue to try to motivate people to step up and join the fight. I will tell you, one of the most rewarding experiences that I've had recently is where I talk to moms or dads that are ready to give up because they've been fighting and they don't really feel like people care. And then I motivate them to get back in the game.
I know that kind of burnout. I understand that kind of burnout. I've been doing this for 7 years, and some days I think, we just recently had one of Emily's high school friends overdose from my community, and I just thought, here I've been doing this for 7 years, and this is still happening all the time. Way too much, and it can get to be discouraging.
I understand, but don't forget, you have no idea. You'll never be able to measure how many lives you impacted, how many lives you saved, how many kids didn't use some cocaine because they listened to you or they heard something you were putting out. So don't downplay the impact that you and others are making. But I understand what you're saying is sometimes difficult, but that's why you need to work with people that can keep each other motivated. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for using your experience and your powerful voice to be a voice for all of us who are also, doing this work. We need people like you who are passionate and care and have the ears of lawmakers and others in power, because we don't always get that. It's an important thing.
So one thing, not to be political, because I'm in New York, I got a sense of humor. Ronald Reagan used to have a saying that if you can't get them to see the light, make them feel the heat. So when I used to go into the congressional hearings and the rooms, I'm pretty passionate, I'm pretty aggressive. And having those collages, I still have it on my phone. I send it out. My first collage project, which started the Lost Voices of Fentanyl collages, I made 25 pages of 90 dead Americans on each collage. And then I was holding up the pictures on national news networks. And so when I started pushing that in the faces of our lawmakers, I think I embarrassed many of them, because then their constituents started calling them at record levels and created this madness for these people to step up and do something. So we did put some heat on them. We did put some heat on the national news media to start talking about this, and not in the sense of like I joke around and say grandpa's opioid crisis, because we still have people thinking that this is about the doctors overprescribing, which is happening, don't get me wrong, but not at the level it was several years ago. We've addressed that, and we're beyond that. But we still have opioid addiction. It's still very, very important that we talk about it. But people are outdated. They're not staying up with the evolution of this crisis.
Right. Well, we're here to keep them updated and informed as much as we possibly can. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for what you're doing, and good luck, and keep in touch.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Grieving Out Loud. You can find hundreds of past episodes on our website, emily'shope.charity, along with the latest news on the fentanyl crisis and substance use disorder. Be sure to tune in next week for new episodes right here on Grieving Out Loud. I want to thank you so much for listening. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wannenberg King and Kaylee Fitz. Are you ready to protect the next generation from the dangers of substance use? Emily's Hope has created a comprehensive K-12 substance use prevention curriculum designed to educate, empower, and equip students with the tools they need to make healthy choices. Our age-appropriate lessons start in kindergarten and build through high school, using science, real stories, and interactive learning to help kids understand their bodies, brains, and risk of drug use. We're already reaching thousands of students across multiple states, and we're just getting started. Visit emilyshopeedu.org to learn more and share our curriculum with your school administrators and counselors. At Emily's Hope, we believe prevention begins with education. Let's work together to keep our kids safe.